All right, thank you, everyone, and thanks a lot. I'm this half. I don't know what you call me, but I'm a very rare species. I'm a planner. I don't know, I might be the only one here at this conference today. Jolanda van Heesek is a zoologist, and unfortunately she can't be here because we thought we were speaking yesterday and couldn't change the flights in time, so she had to get back for an animal ethics talk. So what we've got here, what I want to talk about is how do we make and how do we think about the living environment, the places that we all live, the places where 87% of us are likely to have our main interaction with biodiversity in the area around us. So can we have kiwis, can we have weta, can we have skinks, can we have kofi, can we have all of those in the places we live? Now Maggie Barry this morning took the wind out of my sails because she said we can have a kiwi in every suburb, and then I thought, oh, well, maybe we can go on better and have a kiwi in every garden. Possibly even more challenging. So this is what we're talking about. And I work with Jolanda, who's a zoologist, and we've been working together for a while now. We started off by doing habitat mapping, where we mapped every bit of the urban environment in terms of its habitat, including industrial areas, schoolyards. Then we went on and looked at people's gardens, and I worked with Barbara Barrett over here. And we looked at, can people be motivated to support native biodiversity in the gardens? Then we looked at nature in the city, children and nature, and are children growing up in cities, are they still connected with nature? And we've just finished one looking at how nature contact changes as you age. So we've interviewed people from age 65 to 99. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, because it came out of all of those, that what really matters to people is the connection on a daily basis. So can you connect, and can we make environments where people can connect on a daily basis? So these are some of the things that are the advantages, the biodiversity, the ecosystem services, but there's some challenges. And as a planner, I deal with a lot of these things, the sprawl, the densification, the hard landscaping. We also know that nature connectedness has all sorts of things. We talked about the life satisfaction, the vitality, the happiness, the health. How can we achieve that in the places that we live? We've done a lot of work with children, and what we found with children is that the most important place where they connect is their garden, the street, somewhere within 5 minutes of where they lived. And there's this term, nature deficit disorder, where children are seen as becoming separated from nature. Their independence has decreased, we know that. So what we've got to do is to make sure that within the areas that they can access, that there is biodiversity available for them to connect with. Even if it's, when we used to ask them, where do you see a wild animal? They would say the rat in the attic. Yeah. Where do you go to see a bug? I see it on the deck. We need it immediately as part of their daily lives. So we've got a couple of challenges in New Zealand, and one of them is what we call the housing crisis. How do we create new homes that are good for people and simultaneously good for biodiversity? How are we going to do this? And what's happening is that apparently we're all getting bigger because we all need bigger houses. Clearly that's a total nonsense. And in fact, families are getting smaller. So why have we got here, why are our houses doubling in size? There aren't more of us. And why was this seen as a good family house? And now it's kind of up to that. It's doubled in size. But what's happening is houses are getting bigger, but if you look here, they're getting closer together. The houses are getting bigger, the plots are getting smaller. So what we're doing is reducing the potential for biodiversity in our urban areas. We're also reducing biodiversity by doing, this thing here. We looked at gardens. This was in our first 5-year study. This is when we went back 5 years later, we're seeing lots of this. De-vegetation, and that's happening all over. Hard landscaping, Mitre 10 loves it. You can put all these things in your garden and remove the vegetation. So we've got a couple of problems. If we look at what's happening on the outside of Christchurch, I feel bad criticising Christchurch, but I mean, they're not doing very well on the outside. So let's look here, this area here. This is the new development in Christchurch, and this is some traditional development. So what we're seeing in this new development is, we're seeing here, look at the densification that's going on. Look at the lack of good, thoughtful planning that we've got going on. Where will the biodiversity have room in these new type of developments, where we've got this sort of thing going on and where the houses are so taking up so much of the plot? And we look at the more traditional part of that particular one. We see here there's room for corridors, there's room to add biodiversity to the parks, there's room to have stepping stones, to have hubs within the urban environment, and we're losing that. If we look at how it works, this is what we've got here. We've got scattered throughout small green spaces. This is what it looks like. What we can do is put it together, have bigger plots, bigger areas for biodiversity. The challenge, though, is that this works better for animals, for biodiversity. This works better for people. How are we going to bring those two together? So what might be some of the solutions for dealing with this? This is Newtown Flats. One of the things we can do is look at what area is around, what can we do with it. Nature, by and large, will look after itself, but it does like a bit of a helping hand. So what we've got on the bank behind these flats is we're starting to get native species coming in. We're starting to green it because we aren't taking out the weed whacker and turning it into grass. We're letting it become more natural. This is medium density housing in Wellington, and what we've got here is we've got native species here, native planting. This is in Newtown as well, but wouldn't it be even better if we could take that native planting up into the town belt and create even better, more biodiverse links? This is Brisbane. I love Brisbane. This is what Brisbane does for high density housing. They've got the high density here, but because they've concertinaed it, brought it together, it leaves lots of more space for biodiversity. This is a medium density housing also in Brisbane. Why can't we build housing like this in New Zealand? It's not difficult. And what happens is if you put all of your housing together, if you have it closer together but design it well, it leaves space at the back of the plot for this here, and you can even have a big rain tank. So by designing better, we can create better environments. So what do we need to look towards the future? What are these visions? What will they look like? Well, these are three. Believe it or not, the top one is in Pakistan. And as Yolanda said, that's actually not very ecological. But you could plant up those roofs and create biodiverse spaces on your roofs. This is Germany, which does everything brilliantly, some of these new developments in Europe. And believe it or not, this is a hotel in Singapore, and it's got 15,000 square meters of green space, but at various levels. So high doesn't necessarily mean it's lacking in biodiversity. The Dutch have been doing it for ages. This isn't a vision of the future. This is what they do now. These are recent developments. And if we see here, where they're greening the street, they're using the waterways, the natural environment around them. This is actually social housing. This isn't high-class housing. And similarly, this is part of Java Island, where they're doing it. And this is Ippenberg here in Den Haag, where they're having living environments that recognize the environment in which they are. Oh, this is a lovely one, which Yolanda found for a green roof complex in France. And I love the strategically positioned deer here, just hanging about in the garden. But we can build differently. This is another proposed development in Singapore, but in Singapore, and you'd think, Singapore, high rise, how challenging is that? But this is a retrofitting. So this here was the original canal. Parts of it still exist. They've retrofitted this canal such that they now have to have signs saying what you do if you find an otter. This is really high density. So Singapore is showing us the way to go in some respects. This is Hammarby Sjöstad, where I'm going hopefully in a month's time to see if it really does look like this. But again, it's higher density. If we're going to move to compact cities, we need to do it sensibly and well. This is one from New Zealand, and it's a proposed housing association. But what we can see is, again, we've got densification, but we've left room for biodiversity by densifying the houses. But what we could do is we could even add biodiverse walkways and here. This again here, we've got densification up here, single-story housing, but we've created a really good biodiverse space just through good design and good planning. Can it be done in New Zealand? This is South Dunedin, just a fairly standard road. You see this sort of road anywhere in New Zealand. And we asked our graphics person to biodiversify our street for us. And this is what they did. I wanted more trees, but I was told you can't have more trees in Dunedin, it'll shade and people won't like it. So this is the compromise. So why can't our streets look like this? Why can't we use our little leftover bits of land better? This is a little bit of leftover land, just 100 meters from there. How can we do something with that? Isn't this better? And this is opposite a rest home. It's opposite Monticello rest home. There's no reason why we can't do this. We just have to think differently and think beyond grass and the odd bush. But how do we get there? We need to think, and this is a lovely, if somewhat interesting poster that was put out by the Department of Conservation. It gives a nice idea, not very practical, but what do we have to think about? We've already talked about these. These are easy. People agree. But what do we do about little Miffy up here? Do we want to put controls on her? Do we want to put controls on Rusty? And this is why we need to talk to people and work out what is a realistic way forward if we are actually going to have kiwis and other creatures in our backyard. So what's the way to go forward? What do we need to know? We know that growth will be urban. We know that 87% of our people will live in urban areas. We know this will be their primary biodiverse experience. But we don't know much about how it works. We don't know much about what species can work, say for street trees, which native species work best. We need more information. We need to challenge the uncompromising design. We need to challenge the building regs on how much car parking, how wide the roads have got to be. We need clever impact housing design. This is a stormwater drain in a new development in Wanaka. It can be done. We need the urban professionals to think differently. My profession as planning is way behind everything that's been discussed here. And we need the public to think differently, to think about our cats, to think about what sort of living environment is a reasonable one. Are those high-density, single-story houses really the best way to bring up families? So thank you. And what I want to finish with is this collection of pictures which just show what we've got in our cities. We've got a really good base on which to build. We've got amazing gardens. This is Carrisbrook. Nobody's done anything. Well, nobody's played rugby, but it's got its own developing biodiversity. We've got even Roxburgh Toilets trying. We've got Travis Swamp, the town belt, and my own university here has taken the grass away and has started to plant its waterways. And we actually had a female leopard seal who hung out just there for a couple of weeks. So there is a better way forward, but we need to think about how we want to live and what we want to do. Thank you.
In your talk, you finished by, you repeatedly used the word, we need to act on this. And
Yes.
I got the impression you thought like civic activism would be the way to achieve this. But having been involved in developments up in Auckland, my sense is that the developers aren't motivated to put in these additions. It's added cost. And the buyers, once they buy their properties for $800,000, have other priorities than greening them up. So I'm left with the sense that actually we just need top-down edicts from either central government or regional councils, which say this is the way it is. And yeah.
It is all of those people, and that's why I think we need to get out. This is how it can be done in the Netherlands, to show that it can work and it can provide a really good environment, and to show examples like I showed you in Australia. But I think seeing how it can work is going to be far more effective than just having a change, say, in the legislation. We need good examples, and we need these showpiece examples of how it can work and how it can provide a better life, because it demands quite a significant change, particularly for New Zealanders, in how we live and what we think is an appropriate housing style. I think we've got to think completely differently, but we need to be able to see how it could work. And it will need the legislation, it will need the planners, it will need all those other peoples to come on board. Yeah. Thanks.